the problem of appropriation, reappropriation, preservation, denial, or voluntary destruction of colonial heritage, but also that of shared or conflicting for collective memory, responsibility of the colonial heritage were discussed yesterday. Today, Section 5 concerns the colonial monuments and the seat of memory. Section 5 have 5 speakers. The first one is not there. Just the first is not there. The first not there. Marion, Lama, but Marion HULVERSCHEIDT is there. Marion, please excuse me for the tropical pronunciation of the name, tropical pronunciation. Marion HULVERSCHEIDT of University of Kassel, Germany. You have the floor.
Good morning, everybody. So the German colonial school in Witzenhausen, controversial crystallization site of different memorials and memory cultures. Who in this room has ever been to Witzenhausen?
No.
Huh? Okay, 2 have been. Who has heard of it? Okay, these are some more. So, with Gott für Germans honor at home and over the sea, mit Gott für Deutschlands Ehr, daheim und über Meer. This is the school motto of the German Colonial School for Agriculture, Trade and Commerce. This is was a private educational institution funded in 1898, and it lasted until 1944. It was a Protestant national organization and organized as a character education institution along the lines of missionary schools. In the colonial education context in Germany, the German Colonial School in Witzenhausen stands alongside the Oriental Seminar in Berlin and the Colonial Institute in Hamburg, although its unique selling point was that it trained primarily for agricultural practices. Until its closure, the school prepared about 2,300 men and 5 women for life and work in the so-called colonies. The admission procedure was strict and many students dropped out prematurely. So about 20% dropped out because the education system was so strict. The training lasted for 2 years, usually preceded by a practical year. So they stayed for 3 years in Witzenhausen. The graduates were awarded a diploma, Diplom Kolonialkriegerdenkmal. And the after history that in 1956, the institution was renamed in German Institute for Tropical and Subtropical Agricultural Research. In German is the abbreviation DITZL, and this is the abbreviation I will use now. So the DITZL is the legal successor, and it owns the heritage, the buildings. And this is because we are speaking about architecture today, and this is what I want to talk to you today. But the questions are, which aspects of colonial architecture is there in Witzenhausen, and what is still visible, what was demolished, what was covered up, and how can an appropriate post-colonial culture of memory be shaped? So this is Witzenhausen. It's beautiful in the Werra Valley between Göttingen and Kassel, so right in the middle of Germany. Here you see a map of the buildings. And the buildings were already there when the school arrived in Witzenhausen, because the school was funded in a former monastery. You see it in the middle of the monastery building. And there were other buildings around which were bought from the school, from the LTD for the craftsmen, their workshops, and for the pupils, the students to live in there. So you see here, this is a current picture. We don't have a pointer. Okay. So you see the River Werra, and you see the first gate where it said Domstraße right now. This was the gatehouse. I will show it to you in a minute. You see the cloister, the monastery up there, and you see the north wing picture. You see a parking area. This was the place where the greenhouse was until 56. You see the new greenhouse there. Opposite of the monastery is the hospital, and there was also the Jewish synagogue. I will come to this in my talk. So this is a scribble where you see that it was a former monastery, the dining hall. You see these typical arcs there. So colonial is this. This is the gatehouse, and you see the naming of the school right there. This picture is from 1938, where they celebrated the 40th birthday of the school during national period. The lettering Deutsche Kolonialschule was still visible until the 1980s because they overpainted it, but the paint didn't last very long. Today, this isn't visible anymore, but the gatehouse is still there. The first construction for the school activities was a greenhouse. So a greenhouse in the middle of Germany where they grew bananas, coffee, cacao, aloe vera. But is this colonial? It's just a greenhouse. So the lowest picture, you see the current tropical greenhouse now where all the students and pupils from around Witzenhausen go there just to see how coffee grows and cacao grows. Then we have the North Wing. The North Wing was erected in 1905. It's for seminar rooms, teaching rooms, and the places where the rooms for the students to live in. And here you have, well, colonial emblems like an elephant, a snake, and next to the snake is a bird of paradise. So in fact, for agricultural reasons, it would have been more appropriate to show cattle, goat, and sheep. But this is colonial. Okay. There is also the school motto here at the main entrance of the school. The photo is from 1980. Today, this stone with the school motto is not visible anymore because it is overgrown by ivy and vine. So we are still looking for the colonial reminiscence. We have the chapel. The chapel was planned by the director of the school. The director of the school, Ernst Albert Fabarius, was a priest, a trained priest and a military priest who decided at the end of the 19th century that he wants to build an institution for colonists just to train them in good character. And he wanted to have a chapel in a former monastery. This sounds a bit weird, but the money was collected for the chapel up from 1970, and it was erected and consecrated in 1925. And as we are used to it in Germany, you have these color windows in the chapel, and the last one you see down there, there's also the school motto on it. In this chapel, the school director was buried in the crypta, like other famous people who are buried at their home. You see it here outside the chapel is a plaque where this is told. The chapel, you still have the Jesus in there. It looks like a chapel, but it is now used as a library. This is the bust of the first and long-time school director, Ernst Albert Fabarius. This bust was erected in 1929. This was the bust. Is this a colonial memorial? This is a bust of a priest with a priest honor. There is no weapon, there is no askari, there is nothing on it. This bust was made by a Düsseldorf artist, Bernhard Sofer, who was Jewish by origin, and he made this bust out of a photograph. So he never met this guy. This bust was erected 2 years after Fabarius died. You see in the middle, you see the former presentation, and up from 29 until 2008, every year in summer, there were flowers and laid down to remember the school director and to remember the students of the school, the alumni who has died afterwards. But this bust is, the monument is a critical point. So it is owned by the Ditzel, but the rooms, all the buildings are rented out to University of Kassel, the agricultural faculty. And this is what happened to the bust during the time after Second World War. There is no inscription, no information, no nothing. So there was foam sprayed on the bust because he was an imperialist, he was racist, he was whatever, he killed people. And so sometimes he got a clone nose, whatever. But the bust is still there. And now Witzenhausen, post-colonial and other critics say this is a colonial memorial. On the occasion of the 15th anniversary of the pogroms against the Jews, Professor of Agriculture, Professor Gronefeld, made an installation of a stone. You see in the middle picture, you see the bust of Fabarius, and right opposite you see a stone. The stone is there. And this stone should bring a relationship with this other stone. On the other side of the street, there was the synagogue. The synagogue was burned down on 9th of November. So it was shattered on 8th of November already. And this stone should show that students, employees of the colonial school had something to do with it. In 1998, school's 100th anniversary, this professor said again, well, okay, I put this stone there. There was the information, the papers put here on the right paper were not there anymore. He said, I put this stone there. This stone is obviously a decorative stone in the planted border. It is at the same time an indication of the handling of history on part of the Ditzel and the University of Kassel. But then the stone fell into oblivion and was overgrown. In 2016, we had an interdisciplinary project from the University of Kassel, Agriculture Faculty, History and Art. We made a graphic novel, and in this group, we made an information plate next to the bust just to tell anything about the bust, the school director, the school life, the colonial, what is it? So what we wanted to give information, but it evoked resistance and protest in form of graffitis and everything else. This Professor Trosbach, Professor for History of Agriculture in Witzenhausen, since the end of the 20th century, so for more than 20 years, in his last seminar, he made a seminar about the history of the colonial school. So the Ditzel made the school journal, the Deutsche Kulturpionier, so the cultural pioneer, online. It's online available and you can read through it. And because the school had a collection of items from the colonies, they installed an ethnographical museum in Witzenhausen. And in the museum, they kept the skull from Namibia. This skull was provenance researched and handed over to Namibia in 2017. And there is a memorial object within the museum that a skull was kept there for more than 100 years. So maybe this is more a colonial object. Just to sum up, in Witzenhausen, there is first and foremost the name. colonial school. But this name is not visible anymore. Then we have this bust. We have the school motto, which is only visible on the stained window in the chapel, which is the library now. But we had a vivid discussion, and there are multiple voices heard. And the problem is, now we are talking about university, the institution, and the city of Witzenhausen. And also the tourist information of Witzenhausen says, well, we could do something. Could we do something about the history of the colonial school? But it's so complicated. And tourists who come to Witzenhausen, they only ask for guided tours concerning the Jewish history in Witzenhausen, not about the colonial history. And I think this is something where we can work on. And this is my end. Thank you.
Thank you to Marion in history of the colonial school of Witzenhausen, and it's a controversial monument. Now the second speaker is Jens Bacher. Visual interference with monuments, augmented reality, colonial heritage, and the example of the Kolonialkriegerdenkmal.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, thank you so much for the kind of introduction and the invitation and all the other inspiring thoughts, and especially like the former talk, I can completely connect to what you just presented. My talk will deal with the potentials of augmented reality in the engagement with colonial heritage. And my perspective is that of a media scholar and also of a media artist involved in the project I will present, of course, the end. Therefore, my question is both theoretical and practical. How can colonial heritage be portrayed? And what role can the specific media conditions of augmented reality have? And of course, my perspective is also white and German. So it's the perspective of the heirs of the colonizers, feeling the responsibility and the urgency to deal with this heritage anew. So what is at stake here? It's not just a fancy new medium of augmented reality, but questions of the representation of colonial heritage. And with our augmented reality project, with working title Colonial Traces, we want to work on the history and aftermath of German colonialism in Düsseldorf. We are a small team with positions from art, history, activism, and media studies, and we invite different groups from Düsseldorf for participation, and we have various cooperation partners. However, this project is really just at the beginning. So I would like to talk more about the general potentials of the medium of augmented reality in the context of memorial work, especially post-colonial work. And first, I would like to name also the quite general problems this project is responding to. So this is the Kolonialkriegerdenkmal, which I will focus on with this talk. The Kolonialkriegerdenkmal, so it's colonial warrior memorial at Frankenplatz currently. Frankenplatz is the clearest leftover of the colonial era in Düsseldorf, even if it is far from obvious in the city space. It was designed by Peter Bürger and erected in a barracks area 909, the below picture. And the original plaque is a dedication to 5 soldiers from Düsseldorf who served as volunteers in the genocidal war against Herero and Lama in what's now Namibia. In 1935, it was ceremoniously handed over to the city of Düsseldorf and has stood publicly in Frankenplatz ever since. So it was translocated about 200 meters. In 2004, this is the ceremony of the handing over, by the way, the picture. In 2004, the Protestant Church had a metal plaque erected to commemorate the genocide and the victims among Herero. So now I will switch to my perspective. For me, as living close to Düsseldorf, and the absence of a common knowledge about this memorial is much more problematic than its actual presence from my point of view. Although I lived in Düsseldorf and around Düsseldorf for a long time, I didn't know about this at all. It is far from the city center, and I never saw any information about it until I did active research and I came across a report of a post-colonial initiative, which I'm now part of. So when I visited this place, I was struck by how lost this memorial stands in a transit area. And also the Med Memorial Plaque looks completely lost from my point of view, because there's no reason at all to enter this grassy area, just a transit area, different streets are going there. No one stands there. And even if the memorial plaque as a gesture, I think is an important step on the one hand, it can also be problematized. It only leaves room for short and general text, which is in a few sentences explains German colonial wars and makes a general appeal on human dignity. However, it does not mention the colonial commitment of the Protestant Church with a single word. I would argue that for the church and also for the city administration, the plaque relieves of the responsibility rather than upholding it. You could say it terminates the process, it rather leads to forgetting instead of animating the discussion. To put it bluntly, the plaque is the easy way out. The removal or alteration of a problematic monument is expensive, it's controversial, it's almost impossible because of the Denkmalschutz, the Monument Protection Service, and metal plaque is relatively cheap. And yeah, as for administration, it becomes more and more difficult not to react at all to such a monument. Fortunately, this is the easiest way to deal with that. Even from my point of view, it is unsatisfactory. The logic of the plaque separates experience and context. It's rather a closing gesture than an opening for discussion. It keeps things orderly, separated, rather than interferes in space. Especially from a white and German perspective on post-colonialism, media scholar Martin Doll offers a critique on the linear text and emphasizes the importance of non-linear and multi-perspective modes of narration. Only this way can the controversy and the ongoingness of the topic be maintained and one's own ways of reception and interpretation be offensively provoked. And only in this way can it be prevented to take the unmarked bird's eye view from above, which is ultimately the perspective that the colonizers also claimed for themselves. So Martin Dahl was concerned here with his text with museum exhibitions, but I thought, can this also be applied to augmented reality? But first of all, what is augmented reality? AR, augmented reality, AR, is a technology by which virtual objects can be integrated in the camera image of a smartphone or tablet. So on the display of the tablet, this screencast of my smartphone, it looked as if these elements were actually part of the environment. A typical function is that I can place 3D objects in my room so that I can then walk around and view from different angles and perspective distances. This can be a piece of furniture, an art installation, this is both, by the way, but also images, texts, videos, animation, as you just saw, and sound can be embedded in the same way. In an app of Westdeutscher Rundfunk on the left side from yourself, you, for example, interviews with contemporary witnesses of the Second World War were staged in such a way that they could be invited as AR figures into the classroom telling their stories. However, those again are linear narratives and flat video recordings, by the way, that did not or do not open any scope for reception and rather stage augmented reality as an atmospheric journey through time. Likewise, on the right hand, there is augmented reality can be used in a site-specific way, like you're scanning in a QR code and something like this pops up. And in fact, right here in Munich, there's already a AR monument project, which contrasts the male-dominated monuments with tributes to women. Think female is the name. Among them are very interesting works, but from my perspective, unfortunately, they were again contextualized with small linear texts, which now keeps us again in the logic of the plaque, separating the experience and the linear text. And in virtual art, in contrast, I see some very interesting approaches. This work is Kin by Charlotte Tribus, and there is a spatial spread of elements. So you don't have just one monument, you have different elements spread around the space, and those elements also react to the user. For example, those avatars sometimes avoid the users, they go away, and sometimes move around and run towards the user. So my perspective as a user, and my body becomes part of the performance. My view becomes part of the performance, which I would call kind of a reactive environment. And that's an interesting relationship in my eyes. I can interact without having full control over what is happening. So in our project, like I said, working title colonial traces, we like to build up on this approach of a reactive environment. But still, it is really in early stages. I would rather talk here about the potentials of augmented reality that I consider more general, that can be illustrated by first sketches and experiments of a work. So this is all but final. It's the very first things we just tried out. Most of it is really just a mixture of 3D and Photoshop. But I would like to take this as illustrations of these aspects. So first I would take up the aspect of multi-perspectivity. So on the one hand, very heterogeneous sources can be assembled in augmented reality, and a variety of perspectives on this topic can be included, for example, as audio interviews. On top of that, multi-perspectivity can also be stated as a principle of interaction. Imagine from different points of view, completely different elements appear and become visible or audible. So depending on from where I look at the monument, I can learn about its art historical context, about the role during fascism, or look at pictures from our cooperation partners in the Swakopmund Genocide Museum in Namibia while listening to an interview to their director. And by the way, this is Laidlaw Pevinganga, which Martin Kalb mentioned yesterday, as a site which is not a protected political heritage and does not receive official payment. But that's just a side note. This all would not be visible all at once, but depending on from where you look at this scene. And this already takes us to the second step, the principle of involvement. I move physically in order to look at or listen to different elements. I may also have to squat down to the floor or walk behind the monument in order to see certain images or texts. This corporality, so this involvement of my physical body, can even be intensified in dynamic or interactive design. I might have to move quickly in order to read a text that is flying by. Well, one more particular idea is that some photographs turn away as we approach, to purposely make it difficult for us to get this easy bird's eye overview about everything from our safe and privileged perspective as app users in Düsseldorf. And this allows us to directly address our own perspective of reception, by the way, also of our perspectives as producers. And additionally, the physical involvement, so the way we have to move in order to see the elements, might lead to some kind of a performative intervention in the public space. But especially if you imagine several people in this strange area, this usual place moving strangely, it attracts attention and irritation of other people in this public space. As a final and maybe summarizing principle, I would like to really shortly elaborate on virtuality. Instead of the closing gesture performed by, say, a physical play, an augmented reality work always remains in the mode of the fluid and dynamic. It's still open. Can also be updated in the App Store. And monuments can be scanned in as 3D object. I did this with my smartphone. I climbed around and scanned it in. And be deformed, painted on, replaced without implying that the problem is finally solved by CRISPR. But we can try around different possibilities with this data. Quite independently of digital media, the philosopher Isabel Stengers describes virtuality as the mode of the unfinished, which calls for a response, something to be inherited without the response being able to, without the response being able to remove or cut this urgency or responsibility, but rather continuing and upholding it. And taking up this understanding of virtuality, augmented reality can be understood and used as a medium of unfinished response to our problematic heritage. And yet, at least this is the hope, this speculative virtual approach with augmented reality can be used to develop impulses and to continue discussions to which actual physical change in public space can become possible. And to finish those thoughts, I would like to show this one last experiment.
Day-to-day travel for dissertation on how the reality, the digital reality, and this method of photography, maybe photogrammetry, can change our way to perceive controversial monuments. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the inputs of the presentations before. And I hope to add to that with my presentation. I represent a collective of 10 people, and Sarah Berg wanted to give the presentation with me. She couldn't come, so I will give the presentation. My position is that of a free scholar, an academic and an activist, and I address colonial issues through a European lens because I'm of German nationality, but also, of course, as a descendant of African heritage. My father is from Nigeria. I also see the colonial topics through an African lens. So I position myself politically as Black, and racism and racial discrimination against people of African descent is also part of that. We are right in the International Decade for People of African Descent, which started in 2015 till, and it will end next year. And I think the majority of the German population is not aware of that. And one goal was is of the decade and the member states that to promote greater knowledge and recognition of the history and heritage of people of African descent, including through research and education, and promote full and accurate inclusion of the history and contribution of peoples of African descent, and also not only of Africa, but also the African diasporas, and to put forward an educational curriculum which is adequate to the history of, to the different histories of Africa and her diasporas. Germany has also ratified the UN Decade, of course, as a member state of the United Nations, and with that, it obliged herself to come to terms with her brutal history and history of colonial rule, and to give justice to the peoples concerned. But only lately, the Federal Republic of Germany has apologized for the committed genocide of the Germany Empire against the Lama and the Herero. And it was the first genocide of the 20th century, and not only that, and the first German genocide, and it took place from 1903 till 1908.
80% of the Herero, 50% of the Lama, and a large proportion of Damaras and San were victims of the German campaign of extermination. They were massacred, displaced, dispossessed, raped, driven into forced labor, deported to other colonies, and the genocide and abuse, of course, has left a big stain on the souls of the victims, and rehabilitation is needed. And this is only one example, and if you want to have a deep look into that issue, only lately a filmmaker has engaged in that theme. I don't know if you know the film The Measures of Men. I can't remember the name of the filmmaker now. And it has been released in 2023 this year. And it's really worth watching the movie if you want to dive deep into this history of genocide. Germany's the cityscapes, therefore, are characterized by traces of colonial past, even if that is not acknowledged. And there is I would say a state of amnesia sometimes, because the colonial rule lasted about 30 years. One can find streets which are named after colonizers and which are reminders and topographical markers of the brutal colonial times and crimes in the name of the German Empire. To name some, Lüderitz, Nachtigall, von Grafenreuth, and there are still more in Munich, about 30 streets which are named after colonial crimes and their colonial perpetrators. So our agenda as activists was, first of all, renaming of streets that honor colonists in Germany or contain racist terms in their names. And in future, these streets should not glorify and honor personalities of these crimes, but rather personalities of anti-colonial resistance. Only one out of the nearly 30 streets was renamed, and that was the street which was named after Lothar von Trotter, who had given the order of extinction of Lama and Herero. It was in 2009, and it was by a politician named Siegfried Benker, and he put forward that issue. Starting from the agenda of the UN Decade for People of African Descent, I would like to introduce our project Decolonize Munich, which officially took place exactly 10 years ago, with a preparation of 2 years or 3 years, more or less. When we met as a multidisciplinary group of activists and or academics for the first time in December 2010, the very specific plan was to address unequal power structures which reinforce historical narratives that contain bundles of silences of the parties oppressed. These silent gaps are found not just in academic histories, but in sources, archives, and more broadly, in how societies, I would say, mind setting is, how to remember the past, tell stories, and establish historical significance to the narratives. Our goal, therefore, was, first of all, a counter-narrative or counter-narratives to these mainstream narratives. One tool was to bring a touring exhibition called Freedom Roads from Berlin to Munich, which addressed the problematic of colonial names, street names. Who were we? We were mostly consisted of Black initiatives, Black self-organizations who had been existing since the 80s, like the ISD, the Initiative of Black Germans in Germany, and ADEFRA, his sister organization, the ADEFRA, the Afro-German. It was originally the Afro-German women's organization, but then changed into Black Women's organization in Germany, and MOOC Postkolonial, which consisted of mainly white academics and activists, our allies, and North-South Forum, who addresses global issues. In a process that ultimately lasted 3 years, we set out in search of funding, co-organizers, and suitable rooms for the presentation of Freedom Roads. And we not only wanted to address street names, but also the colonial traces in the cityscape and civil society of Munich. Decolonize Munich, the title of the exhibition, and the entire project was the result of intensive talks and discussions. After almost 2 years, the City Museum and the Cultural Department of the state capital of the city of Munich decided to get involved in the project, and an unusual collaboration started. From October 2013 to February 2014, that were 3 months, a 4-part exhibition project was finally presented in the rooms of the Munich City Museum. It consisted of the traveling exhibition Freedom Roads. I will come to that later. And another part was the exhibition of traces, views, and disruptors within the Munich cityscape, which dealt with post-colonial traces in Munich, and the installation created for the Munich City Museum by artist George Adakbo. He made an installation. He is a Benin artist. Decolonize Munich was visible for 3 months, and on advertising pillars of the city and on the facade of the Munich City Museum. So what were our objectives associated with the exhibition and accompanying program? For us, of course, empowerment and occupying spaces was the major goal. Then to position colonialism in Munich, not a topic much talked about, post-colonial perspectives with aspects of racism, colonialism, and of course resistance. Munich as a post-colonial city and society, past and current colonization, and above all, decolonization process, to start with the decolonization process. Raise awareness of Germany's colonial past, continue the discussion about renaming streets, and also, I think, put into view our educational work, especially in schools, for children and young people, and to find new access to another archive of knowledge. I think I have to be a little quicker. So we also wanted to focus on the repercussions and traumata through colonial rule, and also to language archives, colonial racist language archives. So we organized certain symposia, we had art interventions, expert talks, workshops, and city tours. That is the installation of George Adakbo, an artist from Benin. Ironically, he takes the perspective of an ethnologist and archaeologist collecting objects from which indicate the varying culture, and he his view was that of looking from above onto the varying culture, like ethnologists do on so-called foreign cultures. And we also wanted to discuss in how far colonialism left its mark on Munich cityscape, clearly, but not only that, also where are other places in the city where post-colonial conflicts are represented, and that was, of course, the space of the museums, like the museums of 5 continents. And we also wanted to, how can I put it? We wanted to make visible disruptions, how artifacts are displayed and in the museums and how they are discussed, and whether there was a provenance research or not, or whether they were just displayed without a narrative. So I'm coming to Freedom Roads now. This is an installation with street signs that refer to urban local street names that honor colonial actors and takes a critical look at the honored colonial heroes, understands colonial history as a history of ongoing anti-colonial resistance. And I want to give an example. I was concerned with the name with the colonist von Grafenreuth, and a street in Munich is still named after him. And for me, the focus one was on the African view. He was killed by the Bakweri people in Cameroon, and that was a fierce resistance against the German colonial rule, and I wanted to stress that. So I'm coming to the end now. One very interested site of interest in Munich is the old cemetery in Munich, in the southern old cemetery. And here the picture shows a burial of a 70-year-old young Dahomey woman. She probably was either, and she belonged to a troop of Amazons of Dahomey. They were named after, I don't know if you have heard about the human zoos, which also took place here in Munich. And she died. And so this is also a site of remembrance for us Black people here when I do post-colonial tours. And I want to add, her grave at the South Cemetery was closed in 1921. The remains were given to anthropological prehistorical collection. But when she died, after her death, her genitals were removed from her body. The skull was probably also opened. Only then was she dressed in a colorful war costume and laid in a yellow coffin. So addressing also medical experiments on Black people's bodies. So another one is the Oktoberfest, and a lot of people maybe don't know, it's the largest beer festival in the world, but also human zoos and human attractions took place in Munich. And we have here a lot of debates about that, how also nowadays Blackness is represented by racist names of war and the N-word. Then the Museum of Five Continents, which was renamed after our debates in 2013, they changed their name from Ethnology Museum to Museum of Five Continents, and there was a strong debate and discussion of restitution and how far stolen loot has to be given back, and Prince Dumbe was part of that. I don't know if you know the beak of the ships, which is an emblem of royal family. There are different beaks, and up to now, the Museum of Five Continents resisted giving back this to the royal family. This is mapping post-colonial. If you want to, you have access on it in the internet. It's a map who shows the different traces within the Munich city landscape. It's mapping.postcolonial.net. I just leave it for 2 seconds so that you can read. And what remains? We published a catalog and a documentation. The Mapping Postcolonial.net online website is still on. And there are still alliances of decolonized Munich. Bündnis. We do, as different actors, we do colonial critical work. Like I analyze, as a scholar, I analyze school books, which how they present the image of Africa and African diaspora and how they deal with the colonial past of Germany. Then, of course, empowerment interventions and networking with other post-colonial initiatives will always be our main goal. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, Lau, for this excellent presentation. Surely, we need mostly decolonize. Beginning by the change of the name of old and start the name of museum. Private consumer, wow, illustration. We like actually smooth. The question now, we have 10 minutes for question, and the speaker can really come out.
Yeah, thank you very much for this very, very interesting presentations. And I also want to congratulate our last speaker that you quasi overnight produced your presentation and really saved us and brought it. So I think we are happy because it was very interesting, and we are in Munich. So, I mean, this is really important. Thank you so much. I mean, one topic that maybe was uniting your presentations was the issue of, your initiatives, but then facing different levels of resistance by accepting these initiatives and making more permanent, like permanently visible, for example. And I would have one question maybe also relating to our speakers from yesterday, especially about churches in Tanzania, the role of the Catholic or Protestant church and the missions still, of course, existing. How are they positioning themselves in these initiatives? Are they involved, for example, in this context of the Protestant church having this label? Did you come across, a dialogue with them and getting a response to this? And how do you feel about this? Thank you.
Thank you very, very much for the question. This project is really much at the beginning. So I really think about this would be an interesting step to really ask the Protestant church to contribute to this augmented reality application and to position themselves towards their heritage, because there is research, and the Rheinisch-Bergische Mission, which is like the Protestant church around Düsseldorf, Köln, Wuppertal, was very active in colonialism as missionaries, and did, I think 2 years ago, did a conference on their colonial heritage. So there is research, and I think it's important to include this perspective. Right now, we're waiting for the application for financing. And once this is guaranteed, we want to really invite all the people, or even more people than we already cooperate with, into this work. And I think that's the potential of having a virtual space. You can place a lot of different perspectives and also invite the Protestant church in commenting on their own plaquettes. Let's see what's happening. I'm interested.
Yes, thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. I have a question for each of you. Jens, first of all, Entschuldigung für den Namen. Ja, genau, danke. So I'm also very interested in the case of Witzenhausen, as with this colonial school, because I also like to point out that nowadays there are still more than 107 artifacts from Cameroon, which have been collected during German colonial period. And these artifacts are also linked to names of missionaries who were on the spot in Cameroon. So I think it's a wonderful case that you raised here on the different aspects, not only on architecture, but also the mentioning of the human sculpt that was there, but also these artifacts which are still there as hostage of this colonial history. So thank you for that. It is much more a comment. Maybe you also have to react on that. And to Jens, I also really appreciate this way of this engaging with to deal with these colonial monuments. And you mentioned the points of multi-perspectivity and involvement. And during the presentation, I had the feeling that so what I want to know is if these two aspects, that is multi-perspectivity and involvement, goes beyond technicality or performativity, that is in the sense as to involve communities from where these colonial actions took place, where these colonial people who are now, let's say, in a form of who occupy these public spaces today in forms of monuments. So in your project, do you also plan to work with people from maybe Tanzania or and so on and so forth? So I think that's also a level of multi-perspectivity, not only on technicity, but also really involving people from transnationality. So that's what I wanted to know from you. And to Lara, that was also a wonderful issue when you talked about deportation of people, and that you have to deal also with that part of history. And I seized the opportunity to raise the point that in this Herero genocide, more than hundreds of people from from Namibia were deported to Cameroon. Henry Witbooi, who was one of the leaders, and also his son, and many wives and children were deported in Cameroon, and most of them died. So I think it would be also an interesting point to know, to maybe to think of these monuments of the victims in also at the level of transnationality. What happens to the remains of those who have been translocated or deported to other colonies? And maybe I think it would be also a point for you to handle. So thank you very much.
Thanks so much for your question. So concerning the objects that are kept in the museum in Witzenhausen, there was research done on the objects from Namibia, and some objects were removed from display. Currently, Jan Kuver, who is present here, does a research project on the objects from Tanzania, which are kept in the museum. And I would be glad to apply for money for research concerning the objects from Cameroon. And the point is, because the DITSL still is doing agricultural research together with organizations and students from Kenya, Cameroon, Namibia, and so on, there are connections there. And it would be great to build on that. And this is what we want to do. And the easy point with Witzenhausen is, because the objects are owned by the DITSL, which is a private company, it is no problem to hand them back or to remove them. This is not like a state museum where this is far more complicated.
Well, as to the issue of deportation, there is so much to say about. Also, there are unique traces like in the midst of the 19th century, around 40 young girls from the African continent, they were Nubian, were deported via a padre, a priest, to Munich, and they were kept in enclosures in monasteries to serve the missionary issue, for example, and their remains are here splattered around Bavaria, in Eichstätt, in some localities on cemeteries, for example. This would also be a point. But as to the remains, African remains within the African context, of course, this is a very important issue, relevant issue. I mean, I think of, I don't know if it was Captain Whitboy, the Bible was given back from Germany to, it's not only, and the whip, it's not only the human remains, but artifacts which embody a symbolism. And yeah, so it's something we deal with, but I couldn't touch on all areas though.
Yeah, and also from my side, thank you so much for this remark and the question. This is totally crucial. To treat this multi-perspectivity not as a technical issue, not just, is I try to show that we are already in contact with Laidlaw Peringanda from the Swakopmund Genocide Museum, and we want to invite as many perspectives as we can into this project, which where you can make a direct link from the city space to communities, also in the former colonies. There, for example, in Düsseldorf, in the former zoo, there were also the human exhibitions. There still is the Wissmannstraße. So there are so many connections to former colonies and to the violence and the extraction just going on there. And so I would love to invite many more perspectives, because I speak as a white person. I cannot do the storytelling of what happened. So I think the chance is to really invite many perspectives into this virtual space and to have many voices without a voiceover explaining the connections. And I would like to use also this conference to invite and to contact maybe some of you to contribute to this, because there was so many inspiring thoughts and perspectives. Yesterday, the aspect of storytelling impressed me a lot, and I think it's important to give away some of the control over this project and hand it over to communities to tell stories by themselves and not that we tell them.
And I just want to...
So I think that an artist can be free of his vision. In your work, you can be free, technical or philosophical vision of an artist can be free. Other question?
No, I just want to add something, because I was also the co-organizer of 5 Pan-African Congresses here and in Munich. The first Pan-Africanism Congresses in Germany. And also part of this was to invite Namibian delegations, representatives of the Lama and of the Ovaherero. And only this year in January, we reached out to Naita Hishono from the Namibian Institute of Democracy. So there is an ongoing process of exchanging thoughts on this matter, also on the matter of compensation and other matters. Yeah.
Thank you. There are a few comments and questions in the chat. Marianne Bale Mudumbo, she writes regarding the presentation made by Modupe Laya. She thanks you, and she says about these female soldiers. They were called Agudie. I don't know how to pronounce it. They were female elite soldiers, and the film The Woman King is a tribute to them. And then there's a question by Kath Peterson. Just a second. She also has a question from Modupe Laya. What do you see as the role of artist interventions in museums going forward? We have seen a number of amazing artist-centered interventions in museum spaces, but I sometimes worry that these are being employed as a way for museums to absolve themselves of accountability, whereby they feel like their work is now done and they no longer need to do anything else. Do you have any solutions or ideas for how to avoid museums fossilizing in this way? And let me just check. Marianne Balle-Modumbo also mentions den Atlas der Abwesenheit about entities from Cameroon. I think that's it so far.
I first of all want to address the first comment. This Dahomey troops within the human zoo context, they were put together artificially, and it was to present a certain image of Africanness. So they were from different regions, but as the German population was very much curious about the Amazon warriors, and there were also books released, I think, at the beginning of the 19th century. So this historical narrative seemed very interesting, and there were other troops like Sudanese village, and so on. And it was all a scenario. It was not a natural way. Even the clothes were not natural. So it appealed to the public and their curiosity and their voyeurism. And as to the second comment, I would say it's not one or the other. I think artistic intervention is very important because it opens up debates to a broader public, but it shouldn't prevent museums to deal with their issues, like with the Museum of the Five Continents. I always have problems with that name. Renaming an institution is not enough. So more has to come out of it. There has to be debates. There has to be an ongoing process of restitution. And holding back these issues doesn't solve the problem. And so there has to be a lot of exchange with partners from the continent, not excluding experts from the continent who have a clear view on what is necessary and what is to be demanded. So yes, that would be my answer. I was a curator of an exhibition here in Munich, which closed up last week and has been for 2 months accessible to the Munich public, and there was a real interest in this exhibition by Thabo Tindi, a South African photographer, and it dealt with Black representation in Munich. And I opened up the space for the communities. There were actors, artists, scholars within talks debating over all of these issues which were mentioned yesterday and today. And we had about 1,000 visitors for a gallery which was like 50 square meters broad. It was a very small gallery, but so the interest is there, but also the interest in how to transform something very problematic, very conflictory into an artistic work. I think art is very important, and culture, and and you as an artist.
I just wanted to add on to this because I think this is the crucial moment right now, also in as the actual government of Germany mentions for the first time in their contract the memory culture of German colonial heritage. And I think this is crucial to think about. There are punctual projects, and they're so important, and I think our project is the same, but how to put it into not just punctual spotlights, put it into practice, and to turn it into a memory culture. And this is also the question of funding, because right now we applied for project funding for 1 year, but there's no funding at the moment. Maybe in Witzenhausen, I don't know what is there, but but the funding is for one project, 1 year, maybe 2, and there's no continuous funding in memory spaces, in memory work, which is really nachhaltig, which is really sustainable. So this is sustainability to go beyond punctual project is the crucial point which needs to be tackled politically in some way for funding and the institutions.
There was the question of my funding, so I don't get any funding for this, what I do here. And the German Center for Cultural Kulturgutverluste is funding the Human Lost Art Foundation, funds the project of Jan Kuva, and Jan Kuva is the Tanzanian side who is doing, well, okay, Jan is the both, in fact, you do both sides, yes. And well, this is it. So I don't get any funding, and the point of artist would be great, but in fact, in Witzenhausen, due to the agricultural institution there is a lot of connection, communication, interaction with students, PhD students, and other institutions from Africa and South America and whatever. So there is the connection. It's not a white institute, although the history was white.
The discussion can be followed after during our dinner breakfast.